kids need to now learn how to protect themselves. They need to learn how to shop. They need to learn how to make those choices that will preserve their health and their fertility. And we're starting with kids in the kindergarten, first, second, third grade, fourth grade. And we're going to teach them that you can make safe cleaning products with a little distilled white vinegar and alcohol, a little liquid soap. You don't need to bring out the nuclear bombs, the triclosans, and the phenols, and the quat compounds to make your home clean. And they're going to tell their parents. And that's what we need to do at every school.
You're listening to The Human Upgrade with Dave Asprey. You're listening to The Human Upgrade with Dave Asprey. Today, there's a crisis in America. Now, I kind of don't like crisis reporting. In fact, usually when someone says that, you should say, why are they trying to program me by triggering my fight or flight response, which is a valid question. However, sometimes things really are at a point where you got to pay attention. And I want to share some really important information with you about bubble bath. What? Okay, not really about bubble bath, but about things that are present in our food, especially man-made chemicals, that are provably bad for us and things that are almost unregulated in the US. So I brought an expert in to talk about the consequences for pregnant women, the development of babies and children. You're going to learn what to do to protect your kids, the next generation, and possibly yourself from this unacceptable pollution that's happening in our food supply legally. Our guest today is David Steinman, who's an environmentalist, journalist, call him a consumer health advocate, and he's written books on the subject, including Diet for a Poisoned Planet. That came out in 1990. He's been working for 30 years on solving this problem. And when I say solving the problem, it's not just raising awareness, because making people afraid isn't the issue. It's raising awareness and taking action so that you actually have control. Because awareness without action just creates helplessness. And that's something I appreciate about his work, including his newest book, Raising Healthy Kids, Protecting Children from Hidden Chemical Toxins. It's a real deal. And as you might know, if you're a longtime listener, my very first book was on fertility and how to have smarter, healthier children. It's called The Better Baby Book. Came out in 2011, based on the 5 years of toxin removal and nutritional improvements that restored fertility in the mother of my children. So I believe very, very strongly in what you're going to learn in this episode today. David, welcome to The Human Upgrade.
It's so great to be here. That's really interesting regarding your first book. You tell me about it, because I think we have a lot of similarities there.
You know, it's called The Better Baby Book. And my wife at the time had PCOS and is a medical doctor from the Karolinska Institute. So her colleagues said, look, you're infertile, sorry. And I said, I don't really think that. I'm this weird biohacker thing. A lot of skepticism from medical doctors back then for biohacking. But we had one child when she was 39, one when she was 42, no IVF required, removing toxins, increasing nutrients, getting the right fats, the right amount of protein, lowering stress. Magically, that can really turn on fertility in people.
It does.
And what I'd like people to know about today is, if you get rid of toxins, you can turn fertility on. But if you keep getting rid of toxins and improve your health, then you set up the environment for a really healthy baby. Because as soon as your fertility turns back on, it's probably not the right time to get pregnant. It's like take another few months to get stronger and then have the baby. At least that's what I learned from my book. What do you think?
Well, my wife did a 30-day detox to enhance her fertility. She came back and we had our first child that way. So I really find that it was extremely helpful. She wanted to clean up her lifestyle and flush out a lot of toxins from the past. I won't go into all the details, but all sorts of toxins accumulate. And we found that sauna, low heat sauna, we could actually measure the organochlorine pesticides in the perspiration of people. We've actually done that in some of our work here. So we know that it works. And it's routinely used, for firefighters to detox. And But the point is we are really having a fertility crisis in America, aren't we?
It's funny. Ever since I wrote that book, I'm very active in the longevity movement. I've talked about how I'm planning to live to at least 180. And people say, what if there's too many people on the planet? Like, are you not looking at the math? When I was 30, we would say, I sure hope I don't get pregnant when I don't want to. My 30-year-old friends today are looking around saying, I hope I can get pregnant. And this is a massive shift. And the birth rate is so far below the replacement rate that we're actually in the middle of a slow-moving population crash across all of the developed world. And I think pesticides are a major contributor to this. Maybe not the only one, but the biggest one. What are the toxins that you pay the most attention to?
Well, certainly, Dave, pesticides are among the top things that we need to be concerned about when it comes to exposures. But pesticides we generally associate with the food supply, but there are other chemicals that have a very dramatic impact on our fertility. One important thing, we're kind of talking about fertility in kids, but everything we're talking about applies to anyone who wants to be healthy. Okay, if you're not healthy, kids are going to have a hard time being healthy too. It's a very much a nature-nurture situation we're involved with.
You talked about pesticides as being one of the major contributors. And pesticide exposure, it comes not just from your food, but from your environment, right? I mean, who knows what your neighbors are spraying, or maybe you even have pesticides that you put on bugs in your house or something. So there's a dust issue. I spent time as a teenager living in the middle of agriculture territory, which means I have a very high pesticide exposure from that time. What are the worst sources of pesticides for adults and kids?
One of the worst sources can be your drinking water. And I want to talk about that for a moment because folks may not realize that's a constant and chronic exposure. And let me just give you a few real life examples. I run a nonprofit group called Healthy Living Foundation. We're very active in California in enforcing consumer laws. And we also work in other states. We work, for example, in Louisiana in Cancer Alley. And Cancer Alley, for your listeners who might not know, is a stretch of river that's about 85 miles between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. There are about 200 chemical plants in that stretch. They're all along the river, and it's primarily, the chemical plants tend to be concentrated in Black communities. If you look at the water quality, which we have for about 1.3 million people living in Louisiana alone, their water every day contains residues of a pesticide called atrazine, another called simazine. It will also contain phthalates, benzene, hexachlorocyclopentadiene, and the list goes on. Those are some of the major ones we found. So you're drinking water. Let's take atrazine, for example. Atrazine is an herbicide. The reason why it's used, why it's being found in the water in Louisiana, for example, is it's being sprayed on all the sugar cane that lines the banks of the Mississippi. And that runs off into the surface water. And then when it's delivered to the 1.3 million Louisianans who get their water from the suppliers, it's not well filtered. And levels of atrazine remain even after the filtration. Atrazine is what we call an endocrine disrupting chemical.
A big one.
It's huge. It's huge. Yeah.
Something in the early 90s happened in the environment. And since that time, incidence of everything bad in our children has gone up and obesity has gone up. And it's like, we have enough science to figure out what it is. And he says it's likely one of the 8 big polluting chemicals. And I think atrazine is pretty high up there. If you've been listening to The Human Upgrade for even a little while, you know that alcohol isn't good for you. Also, if you're like 99% of people out there, you probably do drink on occasion because it's a social experience and it tastes good. And let's face it, it feels good. So what do you do about it? Well, the thing I'm most excited about is a product called ZBiotics, because ZBiotics makes a genetically engineered probiotic drink. And you have this before you have alcohol. And for the next 24 hours, it helps to protect you from the toxic breakdown of alcohol. And it's genetically engineered, but it's not the kind of genetically engineered crop stuff we're dealing with. It's actually an edited bacteria that can't reproduce. And what it does is it just breaks alcohol down into something that's not toxic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking, because you know how those PhDs are. Here's why it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct called aldehyde in your gut. It's that product, not dehydration, that's making you feel like crap the next day. ZBiotics produces an enzyme that breaks that toxic byproduct down. All you have to do is remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night, and then you'll feel so much better tomorrow. Every time I serve alcohol at parties at my house, I put ZBiotics out, and everyone says, wow, I feel so different. And when I have sake with my sushi, I take ZBiotic. So if you're planning a little partying this summer, definitely take care of your liver and take care of your aging with ZBiotic. Go to zbiotics.com/Dave to get 15% off your first order. ZBiotics has a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you are unsatisfied for any reason, they'll give you your money back, no questions asked. This stuff really works. What would someone do, though? Okay, you might live in that watershed, or you just don't want atrazine in your water. What's the best way to protect yourself?
So what I'll say next is applicable to everyone listening to this show. Everybody. In working with folks in Cancer Alley, it's not particularly a wealthy community, to be quite blunt. A lot of folks are poor. They may make $17,000 a year. They may not have enough money to go test their water and prove to themselves what I'm telling them from a public source, records. So this is what I tell everyone listening, if you're on a budget or not. Don't worry about testing your water. If you have $100 extra, you can do a lot to protect yourself and your family. And here's what you do. Number one, you get a faucet. If you don't have, I'm talking about $100. Okay, if you have more, I'll tell you what to do then, but I'm talking about most of us. $100, spend $25 and get yourself a faucet filter. It attaches to the end of your faucet, and that will reduce many of the most harmful chemicals like atrazine and organophosphate, pesticides, and herbicides by about 85 to 90%.
Wow, this is cheaper and more effective than a Brita filter, right?
Well, we'll get to step two. Because Brita makes faucet filters, by the way, and these work really well. In fact, some of them have been tested to remove forever chemicals pretty efficiently. And the forever chemicals are very difficult to filter out of our water. And most likely, if you live near a military base or fire station or in just manufacturing facilities in many areas like Vermont, New York, your water will have what are called forever chemicals, or PFAS. Those are called fluoroalkyl substances, which is kind of a tongue-twisting word, but they're forever chemicals and they cause cancer and reproductive effects. So the Brita is a good choice. Now, you've spent $25 for your faucet filter.
Right.
Now spend another $25 or $30 and get yourself a zero water pitcher filter. I say zero water. This is the pitcher filter my group, HLF, actually delivered to residents in Cancer Alley to help them with their drinking water pollution problems. And it's the one I use actually in my own home. So the water gets filtered through your faucet filter, then it goes into your zero water filter and you get a double filtration, which removes even more. You've spent about $55 now, okay? And you have done more with that $55 than that $550 a month you're going to spend on health insurance in just those two little acts. Your kids are going to be healthier, your pregnancies will go better, and you'll have less chance of cancer. But we're not done.
Okay.
You have spent $55. Suppose you do live in an area where your water is polluted. You have to be careful about what's in your shower and coming out of your hose. So how about spending another $20 and getting yourself a little shower filter? This is easy to attach. It goes right in between the shower head and the pipe. You screw it in. And, you know, when you take a shower, you can inhale as much contaminants as you would in drinking water. They just become gaseous, so you inhale them instead of imbibing them. So now we've spent about $75. What do you do with that last $25? Well, you have a garden, right? Because it's cool to garden. But if your water's contaminated, you need to do it there too. So now you can get a little filter for your hose. And that will take out both any lead, any PVC that might be in that hose from the flexibility materials used in it, and it will make your garden water. So for about $100, Dave, we have done more for your health than what $1,000 of health insurance will ever do. I'm really just trying to be straightforward because this prevents, delays illness. So if you can test, that's great. I love to test because I've got that little bug in me that I like to, that's what my group does, we test. If you really have extra money, say you have $300, then you could get a filtration system that goes under the sink. It's called reverse osmosis. And that is by far the very best. So, yeah, that's my first advice in terms of reducing exposure to pesticides. My second one would be organic foods.
I went through a couple of different brief experiences in my life. When I was in my 20s, I weighed 300 pounds. And yes, I lived in part of the world with lots of pesticides, but probably more likely for me, it was a mold toxin that's also a xenoestrogen. And when I had my blood tested, I had less testosterone than my mom. And having felt what it's like to have low testosterone and dopamine go together. So you're just less motivated. You're less motivated to get a job. You're less motivated to ask someone out. And it's kind of a depressing sort of a vibe. And this really does happen. And today, our young people have half the testosterone levels they did 30 years ago. So something happened 30 years ago.
Oh, it's been happening. And we've nailed it. We are talking about the cause. It's this pervasive exposure. I'll just give you another little example. And this is impacting everyone, by the way. Again, low testosterone, you want to get those xenoestrogens out of your diet. Even if you're an adult male and you just want to be everything you can be as a human being, or an adult woman, you want to get the bad estrogens out of your diet too, because they stimulate your body to produce toxic forms of estrogen that increase risk of cancer. So it's very important for adults and children alike. And I talk about Raising Healthy Kids, my new book. But, if you want to talk about the impact of of this on fertility, and it all goes together, in researching my new book, I talked to a lot of hairdressers.
Oh, wow.
And during the pandemic, there was a baby boom among these hairdressers. They lived in New York City. And why was there a baby boom? Well, prior to the pandemic, they were using a lot of hairstyling products that contain chemicals called quaternium compounds. And quaternium compounds cut fertility really badly. I show why. Well, once they stopped working with all these compounds with their clients because of the pandemic and because salons were shutting down, and they stopped their exposures, all of these hairdressers started having babies again. I write about it. And it was a simple exposure to the products that we use every day in our cosmetics and personal care. Particularly of concern are those for people with kinky hair, persons of color, because hair straighteners tend to contain a lot of these quat compounds. And so I show you what's safe in raising healthy kids. We're bringing up so many issues. People can start to say, well, okay, it's really bad. I'm just going to go in my cave and forget about it. But actually, it's all of this is all manageable. You can do a quick read of my book, and you're equipped for life. It's really, really manageable. We need it because our society's future is at stake. It's not small stuff.
It's one of those things where people think it's alarmist. When you say society is at stake, I don't think it's alarmist at all. And I see a lot in the news about people worrying about carbon in the atmosphere. And that's a 60 or 100-year problem. And we'll run out of topsoil before we really face all of the carbon problems. But who cares about the environmental effects of carbon if you're not going to stop the pesticides that are destroying life? It's not just humans, it's all the animals and bugs and stuff too. If you don't stop that now, do not talk to me about carbon. Carbon's an issue. It's just a distraction from these incredibly toxic compounds that are found more in the US than in most of the rest of the world. Here's something for you if you dread allergy season. It might make you forget it's even happening. It's Armra colostrum. Colostrum is one of nature's powerful bioactive foods, and it's the first nutrition that everyone receives when they're born so they can thrive for their entire life. Armra colostrum has over 400 bioactive ingredients that strengthen your body's barriers and create cellular health. There are thousands of research-backed benefits. And when it comes to allergy season, you want to get some Armra colostrum. Colostrum strengthens your respiratory barriers to change how your body interacts with allergens. When you strengthen your body's barriers in your nose, your sinuses, your lungs, you can manage how your body responds to those environmental allergens. So if you want natural support during allergy season and beyond, Armra colostrum is your friend. Go to tryarmra.com/Dave and get 15% off your first order. That's tryarmra.com/Dave.
Why are there so many of these things in the US versus Europe?
One of the things about the climate movement, which I totally support, by the way, is it's kind of working from a scientific top-down basis. And what I'm doing in the anti-toxic movement is empowering people to make those decisions in their shopping that will have the impact of getting rid of these pesticides, for example. And David, we've made huge progress. So my second big tip, you were asking about how to avoid pesticides. Filtering your water is the first one. Second one is buy organic foods.
Yeah.
And I want to fill people with hope here. When I wrote Diet for a Poisoned Planet, there was no organic market. There was no federal organic certification. There were no organic foods available at supermarkets. So I had to look at every food and show you which were the least toxic and the most toxic. But the beautiful thing that has happened in the last 30 years, thanks to shoppers who have made the choice to demand safer foods, and now that we have an organic certification program, both on the federal and state level, is that organic food prices have gone way down. You can buy most of the commodities now, the lettuce, the bread, the apples, the carrots, the oranges, cucumbers, peppers, potatoes. You can buy these all for about the same price as conventionally sourced. And I've looked at the monitoring studies. Organic food is so much cleaner than conventionally grown.
Yeah.
You will feel the effects immediately. So that's taking control. The pesticides that are being manufactured in Cancer Alley, where the toxic emissions are coming that are causing climate change. So if we cut down on the atrazine we talked about is made at a chemical plant in Cancer Alley. I know exactly the address. I know where it's coming from. And to show you how insane it is, Florida has 25,000 acres of organic sugarcane now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Louisiana has none. Why not grow? It's not that difficult to grow organic sugarcane. Do you know what a great market it would be for Louisiana? But so organic foods is the second big way, because you not only protect your health and your children's health, but you are addressing climate change. So I want to get down to rather from the top down. I'm trying to empower people from the bottom up and show them how the simple choice things they do shopping impact their health, their children's health, but also the planet. The planet. And it's not 50 years away. It's now. Our kids, if we shave off 1 or 2 points on a generation of kids and their IQ, what does that say for our ability to function as a democracy and to handle complex problems? If kids' brains are short-circuiting from those organophosphate pesticides in their bread or on their strawberries or apples.
I talk to a lot of parents and they feel kind of overwhelmed. Like there's just too much of this. And I know some things that do give me hope in all of this because I started a major grass-fed clean product company called Bulletproof that I'm no longer involved with. My new coffee company is called Danger Coffee. I got to meet the senior leadership from Walmart, the buyers, and I went out to Bentonville and they said, look, we want to buy more organic stuff. We don't know how to buy more organic cotton, because if we could just place orders for all the stuff we want, it would be more organic cotton than is produced. So consumer demand is helping here, but it's when companies sneak it in or they use it somewhere and it's not on the ingredients because it's a contaminant that then we don't know. So I think a lot of us want this, but big industry doesn't always respond with that because they're hiding stuff. What's the fix? I mean, there's stuff you can do personally: clean water, organic foods, don't have stinky stuff with fake fragrances around your house, don't use organic cleaning products, don't use the toxic ones. Other than that, though, systemically, what are we going to do?
You bring up a great issue, because most of the laws people think are meant to protect them, both on a state and federal level, are actually meant to protect the chemical companies.
Yeah.
And because we litigate so many cases, I'll just give you an example of why you as a consumer, and I'm talking about everyone listening to us, me, you, David, everyone listening, zero tolerance is the only attitude we can have.
Yeah.
Public officials will tell you, oh, a little bit of PFAS, a little bit of atrazine in your drinking water every day is not bad for you. Are you serious? Do you expect us to believe that today, with cancer rates the way they are, with infertility the way it is, with autoimmune disease, liver disease, kidney disease, when we have the faces of the victims? You really want us to buy that pablum now? So listeners, zero tolerance. Now, when it comes to that, we do need a better legal structure. I sometimes feel like the little Dutch kid putting my finger into the dike, because, my group takes on the biggest polluters and offenders in this area. Just for example, you've probably heard of Justin's almond butters, nut butters.
Right.
My group sued Justin's nut butters because they had they had a very high level of a chemical called acrylamide, which is an industrial chemical that causes cancer and reproductive harm, in their nut butters, in their almond butter, and they weren't telling consumers. And we sued them because in California, when you have that much acrylamide, we assert in our legal action, you have to inform consumers, because that much acrylamide increases your daughter's risk of endometrial and uterine cancer. The studies are very clear that high levels of acrylamide in the diet, which is found in the nut butters that we sued Justin's for, increases reproductive cancers in women, and that risk starts when they're children and eating these snack foods. So you're right.
So acrylamide isn't a pesticide. It's a byproduct of cooking carbohydrates, right?
Acrylamide is an industrial chemical that is manufactured and used in industry, but
They actually manufacture acrylamide, but it's not in the nut butter because it's being added.
well, we've sampled many consumer products, and ones that are manufactured properly have very little, if any, acrylamide. What we're talking about here, in my opinion, are manufacturing practices that are hazardous because they're producing so much. It occurs in foods because of certain amino acids and cooking temperature and length of cooking. And it's like cooking up a chemical in your food that shouldn't be there. It's not a natural chemical. It's a chemical produced by heat and other chemicals, and it shows up in food. But the point is Justin's knows it's there. We've told them. We've sued them. But do you see any warnings? I don't.
Well, usually there's a Prop 65 warning on acrylamide food.
Exactly. And that's what we sued them under, and that's what they're fighting. I'm telling you this to your audience because this legal case has been going on for a few years now. And that's what I'm saying. The laws are designed to benefit the polluters, or the scofflaws, not the consumer. And Prop 65 is probably the best consumer law in the world, in my opinion. But even here, well-endowed defendants can use their money to delay the legal proceedings. Meanwhile, our daughters who are eating these products are increasing their risk for endometrial and uterine cancer.
Yeah, I have a hard time with Prop 65 because the state of California has proven time and time again it doesn't listen to consumers. And, for years, they would torture the coffee industry, which I'm from. One slice of toasted rye bread has as much acrylamide as a year's worth of coffee. Yet toasted rye bread sold prepackaged didn't have to have a sticker and coffee did. So I would like to see maybe an updating of that because acrylamide is an issue. You look at net total intake for people and agree if a product is made that has way more than it needs to have, something's wrong. And this will sound funny. I knew the former CEO of Pepsi, and we talked about acrylamide in detail. And she went through all the things that they had done at Frito-Lay, because I don't eat corn chips or any of that stuff. But they'd gone through and measured and had something like a 90% reduction in acrylamide by changing the temperature they cook things at it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's entirely possible for processed foods to do it. And this is one of those things that, if you don't know how to cook, you're probably going to get some of it too. But let's go back to environmental toxins. There's some data that a lot of people haven't heard about. Tell me about that Chamacos study, if I'm saying that right.
Oh, this is a great series of studies. This is a partnership between the University of California at Berkeley School of Public Health and the teenagers of Salinas, California, one of my favorite cities in California. It's a farm town where if you eat strawberries, lettuce, any salad fixings or fruits.
Yeah, it's a beautiful part of the world unless it's covered with plastic and being bombarded with chemicals. Yeah.
So what researchers did is they started measuring levels of organophosphate pesticides in the moms in the late 90s. And then they continued those studies of their children. And I interviewed those moms and children for my new book, Raising Healthy Kids. And what they found was that the children whose moms had the highest pesticide exposures were losing 5 to 7 IQ points. That's a big loss. And it was completely related to your fetal exposures during pregnancy. But what was interesting about that study is that another one was done in New York. And they basically looked at the same pesticides. And these kids did not live in a farm community. They lived in a highly urban community. But moms with the highest levels of organophosphates there, their children also suffered significant IQ losses, which told me it's not just because you live in a farm community, it's because you may be eating all of these foods wherever you live and getting these high exposures. So what I learned, though, but the studies that they're doing there go on much further. They've also worked with the teens, for example, on house cleaning to find. They've done a study on cleaning products. They've done one on cosmetics. The teens of Salinas are really quite incredible. In the cosmetic study, they did an intervention where they found that when they switched the teens, they measured their levels of different kinds of chemicals like triclosan, which is another xenoestrogen that has been used in cosmetics, and phthalate and a few others. And they found when they gave the teens much cleaner cosmetic products, the levels of these chemicals were reduced. Anyone who has a daughter or son who's using goes to the body, whose bedroom basically smells like the body shop. We have an intervention plan in the new book, Raising Healthy Kids. I show you how to help your kids through that teenage period when they're buying every cosmetic in the world. I know I have 3 kids, so I've dealt with it. So the Chamacos studies have shed so much light on the environmental exposures we experience, the health effects, and also how to reduce exposures. There's a really heartening story, though, about Salinas. I'll tell you. Like you have, Salinas is close to my heart, too. It's also the hometown of John Steinbeck.
Yes.
The great American author. And when I would visit Salinas a few years ago, all the schools that were carved out in the farm fields were surrounded by conventionally grown strawberries and conventionally grown lettuce. And the kids were being exposed to very harmful pesticides like diazinon and chlorpyrifos, things that really do something to the kids' brains in terms of neurotoxicity. I went back during the pandemic, David, and I went to the Lagunita School and the McKinnon School. And I was looking around. You know what they were surrounded by? Organic strawberry and lettuce fields. I was in tears because for all those years that I'd been buying organic strawberries and lettuce, and people were telling me, why do you waste your money? Why are you buying organic? I kind of saw a miracle because I did it on faith. And then when I was out there last time, I saw that all those organic strawberries or lettuce that I was buying made a difference in these kids' lives, because the organic strawberry fields means they won't be exposed to the chemicals being applied right next to the school. I mean, there's a chain link fence, then there's the field, and then there's their playground. There's no separation of exposure, but they were all organic. Now, I called a teacher there, Oscar Ramos, who taught then at the second grade at the Sherwood School. I said, Oscar, what's going on? He said, well, David, it's people like you who have been buying all those organic strawberries that moved the market. That's working from the bottom up. And so our shopping dollars can reduce those environmental exposures. We really do have the power.
Fasting. It's one of the best biohacks because there are so many benefits to your body, and it doesn't even cost anything. Fasting can help you live longer, increase your brain power, and even turn back your biological age because it induces something called autophagy. Autophagy swaps out old or damaged parts of your cells with fresh new ones. There's now an awesome product called Spermidine Life that actually tricks your body into thinking it's fasting, which triggers autophagy without any actual fasting required. Spermidine Life is extracted from non-GMO plants and it's super clean. Fast smarter, not harder. Add Spermidine Life to your stack today, whether or not you practice intermittent fasting. Go to spermidinelife.us, use code ASPREY25 for 25% off your first purchase. If you're on a limited budget and you go to the store, you find the things that are organic, that are on sale, and you just do your best here. And I'd feel blessed. I raised my kids on a regenerative farm that I built because I'm aware of the things you're talking about and the benefits of having healthy soil and healthy food and animals and trees and all that stuff. It's something that most kids don't get in the modern world, but they can still have a clean environment. And I think that what you feed a mother 3 months before she gets pregnant, what you feed a father too, what she eats during conception and during the pregnancy period, and then that first 3 years afterward, it makes all the difference. You talked about a meaningful IQ point drop. Iodine deficiency is another 5 points. Lead poisoning is another 5, maybe even 10 points. And other pesticides can drop things too. So you might have had a child with a really, really meaningfully higher IQ who was going to solve a big problem. And because of environmental exposures that you don't necessarily see or know about, you might have a kid with an average brain. And it's okay to have an average brain. It's just, it was wasted potential that we all want our kids to be happy and successful and not have ADHD and not be depressed. And that same study you talked about pesticides, what did it find about ADHD and pesticide exposure?
Good question. Both the study done in New York and the California study both have strongly linked increased risk for ADHD with exposure to organophosphate pesticides. Organophosphate pesticides specifically affect the ability of the brain to conduct nerve impulses between synapses. And it causes a buildup of acetylcholine because it inhibits the enzyme that breaks down acetylcholine. So ADHD, there's a big increase. You add phthalates from the cosmetics, you get a cognitive decrease. And, we were talking about an average kid, but this affects all of society. So we have kids that are below average, and then they get even dumber. It lowers the IQ of the whole society at a time when our lives are so complex. And democracy requires intelligence. Democracy requires our ability to think critically, because at the core, David, what we're talking about are these hidden chemical toxins. And it's that in itself requires a great deal of intellect to make a link between what we can't see and the health effects, which we have to tease out. What I've tried to do in raising healthy kids is put faces on this. So you can see my friend Robert Taylor in Cancer Alley, or Sharon C. Levine in St. James, or Susan Wind in Mooresville, North Carolina, whose daughter got thyroid cancer from a combination of radiation and coal ash. I want to put faces on it and make it simple to see, yeah, these impacts are real. Here are the people telling their stories and what to do. And, none of the politicians are addressing it on that very core level of, we've got to stop the demand, turn off the spigot too. We can't just do it from the top down. If we want to prevent disease, we have to go through prevention. And too much of the law now is designed after you get sick. Oh, you can do a toxic torque for glyphosate, Roundup exposure, but only after you get your cancer. Who wants to go through that? We should be preventing these diseases in the first place. And this is where politicians on both sides have largely missed it in the past, although I continue to have hope that we can educate a party that wants to be educated on what to do, and listen, I know you have your issues with Prop 65, but I work with it every day, and I see huge benefits. And one of the interesting things about Prop 65 is it allows citizens to enforce the law. And that's what I do. And that's empowering the people. So there are lots of good things about it too.
I hear you. Everything has its pros and cons. And I just wish Prop 65 allowed citizens to enforce the law against the government as well as companies. And then we'd be in business.
The people who wrote Prop 65 recognized that government wasn't doing its job.
That is for sure.
Now, they did write provisions that we could sue the government, but they did write in that citizen enforcement provision that we could do the job government isn't doing. Every environmental act should allow for citizen enforcement. Every environmental act, every act concerning civil rights as well, should allow for citizen action. And that's being taken away from us by various courts. I see it happening right now. So I'm very concerned about that.
Let me ask you this. You look at the state of things in the United States right now from an environmental perspective and some of the legal stuff you talked about. Are you hopeful?
I mean, it's a brave new world. I have to be hopeful because I've seen changes that are positive. Now, maybe I'm only seeing a deacceleration of how bad it's getting. And maybe we're only delaying things, which in itself can offer hope. If the flood is coming and you can delay it for a little bit, that's good too. Yes, I am hopeful. I have to be hopeful. I have to be hopeful because as a parent, you have to believe that your child can be healthy. And if you start there and feel empowered, you are hopeful. Where it goes from there in terms of the big, vast universe, I sometimes feel like my family, and I'm sure you feel it, we're on a little raft on a big sea, and we're just trying to keep that raft floating and everyone healthy. And there's a lot of things going on around us. We can't control them all, but there's a lot we can control. And so I want to deal in facts and hope.
The good news is that you don't have to get rid of every toxin to zero levels to have a powerful effect on your life. What I've found is you can reduce your exposure to natural toxins and man-made toxins, and you can simultaneously increase your body's detox mechanisms, your own resilience to stress, your resilience to toxins. And you can radically change how you feel. You can increase the IQ of your kids. You can have healthier kids. It's possible, and it's not always even that expensive. It's understanding detox pathways, all right? Supplements, saunas are not terribly expensive. And we know that they help you to get rid of toxins. So it's just knowing what to do and also not being scared of everything. Where if you live in a state of fear, you actually don't secrete as many toxins. And there are studies for that as well. So it's like, okay, I am now able to do something. And whatever I do is going to move the needle in the right direction. And you don't have to do everything perfectly because frankly, there's no such thing as perfection for this.
The nice thing too, I agree with everything you said in terms of it's not necessarily expensive. The effects are almost immediate. Our bodies respond almost immediately through our messenger RNA. It picks up signals inside and outside the body, transmits it to the DNA. The DNA tells our genes what to do. So if all of a sudden we're putting in healthier foods without those xenoestrogens, your daughter's body, your body, everyone's body in your family will begin producing safer forms of the sex hormones, which have a universal impact on your health, your brain health, your reproductive health. So as we started this conversation, um, our reproductive health and what we do, we can do this by what we put into our body. The effects are almost immediate. We don't have to be scared. My new book, Raising Healthy Kids, Protecting Your Children from Hidden Chemical Toxins, I wrote it for you to read it once and to give you the ammunition you need for the rest of your life. When you said you don't have to be 100%, you're right. In terms of your diet, if you can do it right 67 to 70% of the time, you're on a great track. And then if there are foods you like that you want to sit on, you can do it. But you can also learn that there are safer alternatives. For example, suppose your kids want fast food. Instead of going to McDonald's, why don't you try Shake Shack? McDonald's uses hormones in its beef. Shake Shack uses grass-fed beef. These are simple things that if you can do things that are so much better for your health and your kids' health immediately. And the impact is immediate too.
And sometimes it's the small choices. It's just knowing what to do. And a lot of the definition of biohacking is you change the environment around you and inside of you to have full control of your own biology. The toxin environment around you is just a massive variable, and it's relatively easy to change it, not to perfect it, but just to lower it enough. And there's something else that even the Prop 65 people haven't really addressed. I learned about this because I've gone deep in endocrine disrupting toxins in coffee specifically. That's something called ochratoxin A. And these are made by toxic mold. But the US has no protections at all for levels in coffee. And most of the rest of the world does. So the world's moldiest coffee makes its way to the US where it's legal to sell.
Interesting.
And people say, oh, well, that level is safe. It's below whatever. But there's something called multi-toxin synergy that says if you have this many parts per million of ochratoxin A and that many parts per million of aflatoxin, those are both from mold, and you stack it with an organophosphate and an endocrine disruptor, you might have safe levels of any one of those, but you mix them together and you're not anywhere near safe. And so looking at this as single cause problems versus there's a recipe for toxicity, and you have to have the low amount of all of the ingredients. Otherwise, you get amplifications that we barely understand, but we are starting to understand because of AI. So this is just a call for listeners. Look, there's always going to be some toxins in your environment because you're alive. And if it wasn't for industry, Mother Nature makes plenty of them if you don't know what you're doing, like smoke from forest fires, for instance. So what do? Your best. And you just take a deep breath and say, well, I was educated enough for today, and I swapped out this product for that product, and I turned on an air filter, and I didn't buy the artificial fragrance. And the next day, you probably won't feel any difference. But how long does it take to feel a difference when people start lowering toxins in their environment?
I think the effect is immediate. I really do. For example, look at how you feel after a good meal that's healthy versus a bad meal. You feel the effects immediately. Right? Now, you need to keep it up. But I do think the effects are quite fast. Now, not everything can be reversed. I'm not saying that. Nobody would. But in terms of your children, they'll notice it right away when you start putting healthier snacks into them, less artificial sweeteners, more foods, wholesome foods without organophosphate pesticides. The kids will change within days. You'll see improvements in their behavior within days because it's just going to happen because their brains are going to work better. Their bodies will feel better. And again, this doesn't, you don't always have to spend, you don't have to spend more money to be healthy. Hard stop. I show you how to do it on a budget. I am an activist. I know what it's like to live on a budget. You can do this, but you need knowledge. And that's what I'm trying to give folks is the knowledge. I don't want to feed you for a day. I want you to learn how to feed yourselves this antitoxic information for the rest of your life because you're going to live longer. Instead of dying at 72 from liver cancer because you got exposed to DDT when you were a kid, right? have lost family members to DDT exposures. When they were growing up in the Midwest Corn Belt, they were chasing after the truck spraying DDT, when they were 10, 12. Then when they're 60, they die of liver cancer. The link is pretty clear to me. And how would you like to live to 80? How would you like your kids to be a little healthier? Then stop these exposures. It's real simple.
It is real simple. My father is on a permanent disability from his time in the military being exposed to Agent Orange. And they finally recognized it took decades and decades that there's a very clear pattern of exposure for a brief period and then years later. I also believe, though, that if you recognize that these are real things, you don't deny them for 20 or 30 years, you can take immediate action after exposure to increase how your body deals with toxins. And you can start to shore up the systems that are weakened if you know you had a toxin exposure. But if we pretend like, just walk it off, then we end up with these lifelong problems. And some of the things that made a really big difference for me, activated charcoal. It's something you can take orally that absorbs a lot of toxins in the body. You ever play around with charcoal?
Activated charcoal, of course.
The other probably most famous detoxing agent in the biohacking movement, something I wrote about in one of my first 10 blog posts when I was starting this back in 2011, was glutathione. It's a primary detoxing thing in your liver. You have more of that, you handle toxins better. So if you know you are eating crappy food or you are exposed to a toxic environment, you take more glutathione for the next couple of days and your body can excrete it better. So just knowing kind of what are the antidotes to these are particularly important. I got a question for you, though. You have a choice between storing leftovers in a soft plastic container and cooking the food on Teflon. Which one do you pick?
That's kind of a Hobson's choice, isn't it? That's not fair. That's not fair. I would avoid the plastic container and throw out on my Teflon pans and I'd go back to a stainless steel and iron and take them out of the little packaging if I'm going to cook something that's frozen in those forever chemical coated packages. Take them out of there and put them back into cast iron or steel. What's the answer, though? I'm curious.
This is a real tough one. I think I would choose the soft plastic because I know how to remove those chemicals from the body faster than the fluorine-based chemicals in Teflon. But I wouldn't want to do either one. And in case people are wondering, what's the secret ingredient for removing plasticizers and estrogenic toxins from the body? Well, you'll have to read any of my books, including the Better Baby book, including the Bulletproof Diet, including my longevity book, Superhuman. I talk about it, and even in Smarter, Not Harder. And if you're wondering, what is it, Dave? You have to tell me. No, you have to buy all my books. I'm just kidding. What it is calcium D-glucarate. Because you have these two toxic pathways, or you have these two toxin elimination or detoxing pathways in the liver. The primary one is glutathione. The secondary one is run via glucarate. And if you can increase your levels of glucarate, it will reduce estrogen. It'll reduce environmental estrogens, mycotoxins, plastics, and yes, even BPA from the body. So I consider that to be just an important and relatively low-cost detoxing thing. And I've had several members of my mentorship group called the Upgrade Collective. A lot of them are online today. And by the way, guys, you can join the Upgrade Collective. Go to ourupgradecollective.com. You can be in the live audience for something like this and get some one-on-one time with me. But what you find is people are having high estrogen metabolites in their body or high levels of estrogen-like chemicals, and they go on higher levels of calcium D-glucarate for 2 weeks, and their lab tests normalize. So I'm thinking, all right, if you've been making some mistakes for a while, you can do that. Or like me, you slept in a hotel that has a signature fragrance in the frickin' lobby. They have no right to do that. I didn't pay them to pollute my lungs and to disrupt my testosterone pathways, but at least I can eliminate it faster.
You're so right about understanding the nutrition of detox too. In the book, I talk about, for example, PFAS. There was a study that was done on the combination of chlorella, which is a one-celled algae nutritional supplement, and cholestyramine, which is an anti-cholesterol drug. And apparently the combination of the two is able to help the body reduce the PFAS chemicals. And people might not know that. So I wanted them to know that.
It's funny. Chlorella is something that I've recommended for years for getting mercury out of the body if you're eating fish. And then cholestyramine is a well-known old line cholesterol drug, but it also removes mold toxins, many of which are similar to estrogens from the body. And you would take cholestyramine, which is a prescription drug. You take the stuff without NutraSweet and artificial flavors in it, because you can get one that's clean. And then you take that about a half hour before the meal. So it sits in your digestive tract right where the bile gets excreted when you eat the meal a half hour later. And if you do that with charcoal and maybe some chlorella, you don't have to do it every day. In fact, cholestyramine every day will deplete all of your fat solubles. But doing it occasionally, it's like taking a shower for your insides. Same thing with a sauna. The other thing that's really powerful is something called humic and fulvic acid. And funny enough, you drink Danger coffee, there's a therapeutic dose in every cup of it. It's built into the beans. Because if I'm going to drink coffee, I want it to hydrate me and I want it to help me detox. So I just build that into my life and then I feel better.
That's so interesting, David, about the fulvic acid and the calcium D-glucarate. These are so important. Nutritional supplements, there's a lot of hype in them. We all know that. But when it comes to detox, there are so many studies that have been done that show selecting the right ones can help. There are many foods that can be anti-estrogenic. For example, flaxseed can be anti-estrogenic. It can inhibit the more toxic forms of estrogen, I should say, and supply the body with less toxic forms. For example, a lot of plants contain what are called phytoestrogens or plant estrogens. And when you eat these, they do supply the body with forms of estrogen, but they tend to be non-toxic forms that break down quite easily and don't cause the body to produce the more toxic forms that stay on the cell receptors and don't break down and turn on the genes that cause production of more toxic forms of estrogen. So there are many different ways of dealing with toxicity. I go into them. Organic diet is really important, though, just to make it really simple. Before you get into all the vitamins and supplements, go back and just make sure your diet is largely organic, and choose the right safe seafood. We go into that, too, because seafood can be a really extraordinary source of chemical contamination. We've, for example, sued successfully Bumblebee and Chicken of the Sea for selling contaminated shellfish with so much lead in it that this is just not safe for one day. And now it's labeled in California.
Yeah.
And that's from lead contamination that can result from, for example, a lot of industry where we were studying this in China. The Yellow River which has so much industry, emptied into where the shellfish are being grown and harvested, and they were just building up huge amounts of cadmium and lead from all the industry going down the Yellow River in China and ending up in the shellfish ground. So your diet is so important, first of all, and then nutritional supplements can be a great aid.
You're not going to fix a bad diet with supplements, but you probably can help support it. And it's really sad when you have something like shellfish. Some of them are just contaminated because, our oceans are contaminated. Other times it's the way they were packaged, right? It's the packaging that has plasticizers or even has lead in it. I would hopefully that's not as much of an issue as it used to be. But when you look at the end product, I worry a lot about people who are saying, oh, I'm pescatarian. Like, man, fish is pretty dirty these days. And I always take chlorella when I've got it anyway. Whenever I have fish, because I know about lead and mercury in fish, not to mention all these other compounds. Do you take anything if you decide to eat fish, or are you avoiding fish because you know about pesticides?
Well, I know the safe seafood. So for example, wild sockeye salmon.
Yep.
One of the cleanest fish on earth. That's a very good choice. There are some other great choices too. For example, most wild caught shrimp is fine. Most wild caught scallops are fine. There are many great choices. For example, Halibut will be okay. I show you where it's not okay if it's caught from some inland waters. Um, if you're packing tuna for your kids, I explain why skipjack is better than bluefin. The level of mercury is much lower in skipjack. It's also cheaper. It's the chunk light tuna versus the white tuna. These are all little tips for parents to know. So I know what seafood is safe. I would not eat, for example, bluefish. I would not eat catfish. I would not eat gefilte fish. We actually tested Manischewitz gefilte fish, which is a Jewish staple, and I found it contained the PFAS chemicals in the product. I would not touch it.
It's too bad. It's like fresh catfish. I used to catch fish, more trout than catfish. And the muck at the bottom of rivers is just not a good thing to feed fish you're going to eat. And people still do it. So it's a confusing world out there. And look, if you ate the wrong fish at the sushi house last night, you're not going to die right now. Like you do your best. And if you recognize that, you can take some chlorella like we just talked about and, do your best. And my big goal in this is just say, look, this stuff's important, but it's not a doom and gloom scenario. It's if there are countermeasures and better choices. And I've made plenty of non-perfect choices in my life, either because I didn't know or because I didn't want to. And you can still be powerful and healthy and have kids who have healthy hormone levels and things like that. And I'm passionate about this because I didn't have a lot of those in my late teens and 20s, being 300 pounds, having ADHD, Asperger's, chronic fatigue syndrome, and just the list goes on and on and on. And I don't think there's any one cause. It's the soup that's the cause, the soup we live in. And you can start to remove the toxic parts of the soup that are around you. And then you can rebuild and recover and become much stronger. And the effects on your brain of chemicals are profound. When my estrogen levels were substantially higher, because when you're obese, you have a lot of estrogen, and I was getting that nice boost from plastic and fragrance and from mold. Yeah, I had man boobs, and yeah, your personality changes. And a lot of people are sitting there saying, I'm really anxious right now, or, I'm just not motivated. You got to look at your diet, look at your pollution. Because if you get rid of the estrogens and your testosterone levels can just go up to healthy, normal levels, your motivation via dopamine goes up as well. And there are still some skeptics who say, well, this doesn't matter. And for those guys, look, get shitty drunk tonight and wake up tomorrow morning and tell me that toxins don't matter. Just look at how you feel. And is it possible that there's a slider switch between hungover and epic, and that the toxins you're exposed to, all of them at once, move the slider switch up or down? Well, that's actually how the world works. But we don't teach that to our kids in school. And we don't really think of the world that way. But that seems like an accurate reflection of how things work.
We're putting on a safe cleaning symposium at the Fifth Ward Elementary School on May 14th in Reserve, Louisiana.
Love it.
And we're teaching the kids all about green chemistry, because kids need to now learn how to protect themselves. They need to learn how to shop. They need to learn how to make those choices that will preserve their health and their fertility. And we're starting with kids in the kindergarten, first, second, third grade, fourth grade. And we're going to teach them that you can make safe cleaning products with a little distilled white vinegar and alcohol, a little liquid soap. You don't need to bring out the nuclear bombs, the triclosans, and the phenols, and the quat compounds to make your home clean. And they're going to tell their parents. And that's what we need to do in every school. We need now a curriculum of just health hygiene again, where kids can learn about safe shopping choices and how to make their shopping choices commensurate with their voice, how to make their shopping choices a voice for change, a voice for good things. My friend Robert Taylor, who lives in Reserve, Louisiana, he went to that Fifth Ward school that we're going to be doing the seminar at. There's a big plastic plant. It makes neoprene right next to the school. It's called Denka. They emit chloroprene at levels 70 times above what the EPA allows. And those allowable limits by the EPA are already way too lenient. So we supplied the school, my group, Healthy Living Foundation, Robert's Concerned Citizens of St. John, and Ecos, the green cleaning company, We brought 32 HEPA filters, high efficiency particulate air filters, down to the school for every classroom and the teacher's room, because that will be the cleanest air the kids breathe all day now. But the point is that our shopping, Robert and these kids live right next to a neoprene plant. So the next time you're going shopping, folks, don't buy that beer koozie with all the neoprene in it to keep your drink cool. Or when you're buying a mouse pad, try not to buy the neoprene ones. I have changed my shopping choices. Just for example, I'll show you this. This is a mouse pad. It's made from cork. I didn't want to buy neoprene anymore because I play music with my friend Robert, and his family is getting sick from the fumes at that plant. So what I'm saying is, if we empower our kids to understand the link between our choices and our own neighbors, we can make huge changes. And I encourage people, if you're a surfer and you're going to buy a wetsuit, go to Patagonia or a company that's no longer using neoprene in their wetsuits. It will not only make a difference for your health, but you know what? I know the folks in Reserve where that plant is located. They are so good. They're my friends. I don't want them to get hurt. I want the kids to be okay at the 5th Ward. So your choices really make a difference. This is why we need to bring the educational, we need to address shopping and how it's so empowering in our schools for our kids so they can protect their health and be better citizens. Because quite often it's our shopping choices that make the most change most quickly. We move markets that way.
We do. It's all about demand. There was a time a few years ago where Campbell's soup revenues fell by 20% because people stopped buying it because of all the stuff in there. And they had to make some changes to their formulations. And so continued pressure by not buying the most polluted foods is a good idea. What do you think about Food Babe, Vani Hari?
Oh, you've got me on that one.
Are you familiar with her? Or?
No, not at all.
She's been a really big advocate for removing toxic chemicals from food for a long time. And we've been friends for 10 plus years. And people give her such a hard time online, especially when she was getting going. And they say, you're not scientific, but she is. And so I've definitely, I love to see what happens when you get 1 million people all at once putting pressure on a company. Dude, stop doing this. You don't need to add that to your stuff. It doesn't do anything. It's bad for people. So I appreciate the public pressure side of it as well as the economic pressure. And as we come to the end of the show, I got to ask you one more question, actually 2 more questions. But the first one is, as you continue to advance your career, who's taking up the reins? Like, who are the next generation of people who are going to work on the problem the way you have for 30 years?
Oh, that's David. That's a worrisome issue. I am trying to teach folks how to be citizen enforcers. I'm trying to get a new generation. I think the Shamakos kids, I've worked with several of them. I see great kids all around, but when it comes to what I do, which is enforcing the law, there's probably about 100 of us in a nation of 340 million. We're really quite rare what I do. And I do worry about it. I don't see a lot of folks who may be capable of doing what I'm doing, and I worry about that. I worry about it for a couple of reasons. When it comes to laws like Prop 65, most of it is administered, David, by lawyers. And lawyers play such an outsized role in our society, and some are great. We have some great lawyers that work for us, but so many of them are so below average. And instead of making a law great, they turn it into a little transaction where you get a parking ticket and everyone, goes away and nothing really changes. It's all just a kabuki dance.
It sounds like the lawyers need to get off the toxic chemical bandwagon that's making them below average, right?
For some of them, I'd like to give them that I'd like to give them that out, that there is a change in them. I would like to do that. Most revolutions and change are led by a small percentage of the population. And I do see that I want to educate the whole population to be smarter about their choices. Whether anyone can do citizen enforcement like I do and my group does is one thing, but everyone can make a smarter choice when they go shopping. And that's huge. And so it's really all of us and all of our kids who have to take up the torch when the older generation is gone, hopefully we've educated them to see these things are not acceptable and they have the power to change. And so in that sense, I have a lot of faith that we can grow the movement. Whether we can get specific individuals who can bust companies like Justin's, or General Mills and have the wherewithal and the knowledge and the ability to do that. That's really unique, where journalism and law intersect is a very unique area, because we journalists often have knowledge that could be turned into public change, but we don't make that change through shame. We have to hit the companies in the pocketbook, and that takes legal action. So the combination of journalism and legal action, like I do, is very rare. But the idea of everyone shopping smarter, as you've noted, can be a commonality.
Do you ever take on interns or work with younger people?
Oh, of course. Yes. Yes to both.
I imagine that there are more than a few listeners. We got a lot of people in their 20s who listen to the show who are just looking to be more powerful and more energized and healthy so they can do all the stuff they're here to do. I imagine you might get a few emails or phone calls around this because, it's pretty inspiring. If you focus on what's really going on and you study it for 30 years, you realize ChatGPT can't tell you what's going on. It's trained on bad data. And you realize that there's an awareness that you can build. And if you just work with someone who's done it for a couple decades, they'll just pass it on. That's how I learned biohacking. I learned from leaders in the longevity movement who were in their 80s when I was in my 20s because I was so sick, and they taught me all this stuff, and it became the biohacking movement. So I would encourage you to start helping the next generation of people know how to do what you're doing so we don't lose this, because there aren't many people who are going out there and creatively using this combination of awareness and the legal system to push companies and hopefully and the government in the right direction. So I'm hopeful for a lot of reasons. In the meantime, I'm hoping that listeners who are interested in this will pick up your book, because it's got just a lot of stuff, especially for parents. Just do some of the stuff in the book. You don't have to do it all. And when you do that, you guys, oh, my kids are going to be healthier. Their kids will be healthier. And you just pass it down the line. So thank you so much for the last 30 years of work and for helping to get this stuff out of the world around us, because none of us want it.
David, thank you. You've done such great work yourself. It's such an honor to have been on the show with you. I am impressed by your work and definitely want to learn more. And I hope we do find a lot of people who are interested in what I do, davidsteinman.us. You can go to Twitter, X, formerly known as Twitter. My byline there is by David Steinman. Please get in touch. If you're interested, the book is Raising Healthy Kids. You can go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble, Target, any bookseller, independent chain, and it's there, Raising Healthy Kids. And it will give you the tools you need for the rest of your life. I truly believe that.
I think there's so much wisdom in it. I got a final bonus question for you. I've been really active in the longevity movement, and I've written a major New York Times science book talking about how we're at the point where we can extend human life, not just be healthy and die in our 80s, but actually extend human life. And it's a theoretical question. If you could be as healthy or healthier than you are today, how long would you want to live?
Well, you said 180.
I said at least 180.
Yeah. I would take at least 180. I think that we have really great examples of people pushing the limits now. And I think we need to get rid of the ageism in society and allow our 80-year-old Mick Jaggers and Bob Dylans to be the kids they are, because they seem really spry and healthy. And we're breaking the mold, dude. 70 is 40 now, okay? 70 is the new 40. Technology is good. We need to harness it for good, not for bad. And the longevity movement has shown us so many ways of extending healthy lifespan. So I truly, I would go for at least 180, and we'll talk about it then.
All right. Well, let's meet when, I guess you might get there a little before me.
Let's see, what is that? We're going to be meeting in 2104.
2104, we're going to sit down and we're going to have a meal that's entirely free of all these pesticides that we sprayed around the world 100 years ago. How about that?
Absolutely. And we'll have we'll do the meal, then we'll go off in our rocket ships and go back home, because it's going to be a different world then.
It sure is. Thank you, David Steinman. Again, your book, Raising Healthy Kids, Protecting Your Children from Hidden Chemical Toxins. Seriously, if you have kids or you want kids, you probably need to know this stuff. If you like this episode, you would have loved being here live with me. Go to ourupgradecollective.com and you can sign up. And I do regular calls with members answering questions about all kinds of stuff. And it's an amazing community of people who support each other in biohacking. And you get to be on just about every one of my podcasts in a live audience via Zoom. And I'm chatting with you and talking with you the entire time. Some of the questions I asked, including who's the next generation, came straight from the audience via the Upgrade Collective. I would love to have you join ourupgradecollective.com. And again, the book, Raising Healthy Kids. See you on the next episode.
You're listening to The Human Upgrade with Dave Asprey.